US Civil War here by GMT Games, just about to start the action phases in turn 4, and in fact I've just rolled initiative for the first action phase in turn 4. Look who's turned up though. Stonewall Jackson just arrived with the Army of Northern Virginia, and Longstreet got promoted to a 2-star general. And if you now look at the Army of Northern Virginia, look at the ratings it's got: 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. So if they attack, they can choose 2 generals. If they could get this army up to 13 strength points, then they could use all 3 generals, and they'd be attacking with a +4 and defending with a +6, which is pretty serious. At the moment they're using 2 of these generals, and they can attack with Johnson and Jackson at +3 and defend with Johnson plus 1 other at +4. That's still pretty serious. So the Army of Northern Virginia, having preserved its strength, is suddenly pretty kick-ass. And this initiative roll here, which we've just rolled out, 6 for the Confederates, 3 for the Union, that is a Confederate initiative with, in the first action cycle, we've got Confederate initiative with 3 action points to spend. And, sorry, I'm pointing the camera in the wrong place. And the Confederates have got unfinished business over here in the east, where McClellan has split his force in order to send Burnside off to attack Richmond, and he successfully sacked Richmond, but had to retreat out towards the coast when the Army of Northern Virginia came back and retook it. And now there are 3 action points to spend for the Confederates, and they've got to figure out what they want to do. One of the things they want to do is get something into Fredericksburg, and the reason for that is that control of Fredericksburg is what's cutting these guys out of supply. If Banks, who's just replaced Patterson, comes down and takes Fredericksburg, then they've got a line of communication from Washington, now with an army now controlled by Butler, who's crap. Look at him, 0, 1, 3, cautious, crap. But anyway, they could have a line of communication from Washington down here into Fredericksburg, straight down here to these 1, 2, 3, 4 outside of those zones of influence of the Army of Northern Virginia, straight down, and these guys would be back in supply. So one of the things they want to do is get Stuart here out, try and run him past Banks into Fredericksburg to cut this supply from coming through this area. And they can do that because Strasbourg is no longer occupied by Union troops, and so there isn't a threat down here right now into this area. I mean, he could go and try and grab it back, but cavalry's rubbish at trying to control things because they can only have 1 strength point, and you need 2 strength points to actually change control of things. So he can occupy Fredericksburg, but he can't take control of Strasbourg, so he's best off coming this way. So we want Stuart to come in here and cut this supply line, or make life difficult to get supply through here. Then we want the Army of Northern Virginia to unleash merry hell on Burnside for the raid on Richmond, which burnt a lot of it down. So our 11 strength points and our +3 generals are going to be making his life as difficult as they possibly can. That would be a movement point. We also want to try and demoralise the Army of the Potomac if we can. We want to win a battle against them. So if we could come in here for a movement point, come back 2, 3, and then smash into McClellan, that might be nice. On the other hand, if Burnside manages an evade roll and manages to retreat across the river, and we can't really engage him, we may just have to come back to Richmond and garrison it again. And then we'll have an action point left to make a call from there. So let's see how this goes. So the first thing we're going to do is get Stuart across here, and Banks is probably going to try and intercept him. He's not going to go past the army of McClellan here, because McClellan, with his +2 defensive rating, will have good chances to intercept. So he's going to come through here and up round here, but he's going to be at risk of being intercepted by Banks when he gets here, and as he moves into here as well. So Stuart made it to this hex here outside Fredericksburg. Banks rolled a 7 for his interception, with a +1 for his defensive rating was an 8. He needed a 9, didn't manage to intercept. Stuart is now in a position where he's cutting supply for the Army of the Potomac, because that's into a zone of influence, that's into a zone of influence, that's into a zone of influence of the Army of Northern Virginia, and there's no supply sources out this way for the Unions, so he's got nowhere to supply from. And Stuart figures that if Banks tries to come into Fredericksburg, he'll try the interception himself rather than risking giving Banks it on an interception roll. In other words, if Stuart tries to move here, Banks could have another go at intercepting, and if he makes the roll on an 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12 on 2 dice, he then moves into Fredericksburg ahead of Stuart, and Stuart has to try and fight him out of it. He'd rather not fight at all, because he's just a 1 strength point cavalry unit, albeit with Stuart's great 2 attack, 2 defense ratings. But he'd much rather stay mobile and be, choosing where to fight his battles. If he has to try and defend Fredericksburg against Banks, then he will, because Banks is 2 strength points and pretty useless on the attack. But he'd rather not risk the battle, so he's going to stop there. He's doing his job. He's blocking supply, and he's defending Fredericksburg, albeit indirectly. Now we're over to the Army of Northern Virginia, who are going to activate and try and destroy Burnside. Burnside is going to try and avoid battle here with his 1 rating. So let's give Burnside a roll to see how he gets on. And he's got a 7 + 1 is 8, and he's not avoided battle. And so he has now got 4 strength points up against 11 strength points. So I'm going to roll 2 dice for the Confederates and 1 dice for the Union, and we're going to work it out from there. Oh, so I've got a 7, and he's got a 6, which is a good result for him. So what's going to happen here is Burnside, he's got 4 troops, but he's foraging, so he's on the 3 table. He's rolled a 6. He's got a +1 for his defense rating, so he's caused 1 casualty with a star for the tiebreaker. The Union have rolled, the Confederates, have rolled a 7 +3 for their general ratings is a 10. They've caused 2 casualties, and so the Confederates are going to win, take a loss and win the battle and demoralise Burnside's force. So let's go over and get that done on the map, and then see what moves the Confederates want to make with their remaining points, movement points that is, because the army's still going to have 3 movement points after this battle. So after Burnside's retreat, we end up in this position here, with the Army of Northern Virginia in the hex that he's just vacated. Burnside has retreated through here and up towards Fredericksburg, and the Army of Northern Virginia has 3 movement points remaining. And what it's going to do is move back to Richmond for a point where it's going to drop off some defenders for Richmond, and that's going to be 3 strength points of its remaining 10, and Longstreet as a +2 defender, which is pretty cool because that means his Longstreet is as good as entrenchments. But that's interesting, isn't it? So they'll drop off 3 strength points in there with Longstreet, and the remaining 7 will move here, and then let's think about this. We've got 7 strength points. We've got 3. We've got +3 from Jackson and Johnson. McClellan is actually quite a tough nut to crack because he's got that, even though he's slow and ponderous and can't attack, he's got that 2 defense rating. And so what I'm thinking is, instead of attacking him, we might be better off as we come into here. He could actually try and intercept us. So from, which would be bad because then he'd get his defensive rating in the battle, but he's going to get it anyway. What we want is to have a battle with McClellan where we get our defensive rating and he gets his attack rating, because our defensive rating is +4 and his attack rating is 0, rather than our attack rating of 3 and his defensive 2. We change from a net +1 to a net +4. But we have to run the gauntlet of him intercepting us to do that. We want to do it. We want a battle with him now, though, because he's down a step on his table for his foraging marker, which moves him off the 5-6 column down onto the 4 column. And on the 4 column he can only really do us 1 casualty. Well, he could do us 2 if he rolls a 6, but he's likely to only cause us 1. And on the 7 column, with a +3 on the dice roll, we've got chances to get up into the 2s and 3s. I mean, we could roll poorly, but even a 4 nets out at a 7, which is probably enough. This is looking fairly decent as an attack, and I think we have to go for it because I think we want McClellan demoralised, and I think we want to try and maximise the amount of damage that we can do to this army for the long-term infrastructure damage that it's caused to us. So just to discuss that a little bit, the Union have done 6 I think, or is it 5? This is a 4 and it's now a 1. It gets repaired back to a 1, so they've done 3 plus the 2 points of arsenal damage. So they did 5 build points of damage, which is half a strength point per turn for the rest of the game that we're losing because of this attack. Half a strength point per turn in terms of reinforcements. But what the Union have paid so far is 5 losses to units foraging, so of which they got 2 back, so 2 foraging losses. They've just taken 2 losses to Burnside. They took another loss to Burnside, so they've taken 5 strength point in losses. So they're still ahead on this deal. We want to give them some more worries. The Army of Northern Virginia is coming in here, and I need to remember to get the strength point total of that correct, because we don't want it going in with 6, because we can only use 1 general with 6. We need 7 points to use our 2 generals and to be up on the next column of the table. Okay, does Burnside want to try and intercept? Sorry, not Burnside. Does McClellan, with the Army of the Potomac, want to try and intercept here? Why would he do that? Why would he do that? No, he doesn't. I can't see why he'd want to do that. He wants to try and get back past Stuart and re-establish some sort of supply line. Although having the Army of Northern Virginia, see that why he'd do it, okay, if we think about this, is to stop the Army of Northern Virginia moving here, which then forces him to fight his way through the Army of Northern Virginia in order to get back to supply. Although, having said that, if the Army of Northern Virginia does move there, then that's the point at which he might try and throw the intercept in order to get into this hex himself, and then be able to retreat if he loses back up this way and back into supply. It's tricky, isn't it? It's a tricky decision, this, because if he doesn't try and intercept now, if he tries to intercept now and ends up in that hex, that's not bad for him, because he can run back towards Fredericksburg, and Stuart isn't going to keep him out of Fredericksburg. So yeah, I think he's going to try and intercept this move by the Army of the Northern Virginia to open up a move back to Fredericksburg and recombining with Burnside back there and taking Fredericksburg, and then that opens up his lanes to attack Richmond out of Fredericksburg, and yeah, he feels good about that. Okay, so McClellan's going to try and intercept. He's got a defensive rating of +2, so he needs a 7 to intercept, and he's got a 10, and he has intercepted. So we're going to get a battle in this hex. McClellan's now in there, and the Army of Northern Virginia are moving in. It's 7 against 6, but the Union are down 1 on the table because of the foraging, so it's essentially a 7 strength side against a 4 strength side. And okay, this time the neither side got great dice, but the Union got a 2 plus 2 is 4, and that's a casualty, and the Confederates got 5 plus 3 is 8, and that's a casualty with a star, and so they win the battle and demoralise McClellan. Okay, well, unfortunately what that also does is it means that the Union are down to 6 strength points, and that does not now allow them to use 2 leaders. But anyway, that's another little tactical aside. So the Army of Northern Virginia has taken that hex. The defender has to retreat 2 and isn't allowed to retreat into a resource hex. They are prohibited. A Confederate controlled resource hex is not allowed as a retreat path, so the Army of the Potomac will come here and end up there. Army of Northern Virginia on the wrong side, I flipped it on unfortunately, is going to be there. Let's have a think about what to do next. Okay, just to finish off this final little bit of this first Confederate action segment, it's only their second action point, they've got 1 more to spend, but the Army of Northern Virginia has come into here, and that is so that they are able to react to an attempt to take Fredericksburg with a reaction move from the Army of Northern Virginia. So they're going to try and push McClellan away and wait to get some reinforcements back in there. And that is their second action point spent, and now they've got one more to go. Not totally sure what we're going to do with it as yet. So in action phase 1, the Union largely withdrew. Burnside ran away towards Manassas Junction. McClellan rallied his troops. That was the 3 action points spent. But then the Union played a couple of naval special action cards, partly because they'd lined up some troops to ship around navally, and partly because they had 5 and they were going to start losing them. If they drew 2 more, they were going to have to discard them, so they thought they might as well use them for free actions. And they launched naval amphibious assaults against Fort Morgan outside Mobile here, and Mobile, who knows? The Americans can say. And I'll call it Mobile. And Fort Phillip and Fort Jackson here, you can see that Pope has successfully taken Fort Phillip and Fort Jackson. And that means that this +3 blockade runner bonus for the Gulf has been lost, and he's now in a position to threaten New Orleans, although that is being defended by Kirby Smith with 10,000 men, so it is at least defended. Up over here, the attack into Fort Morgan was horribly botched, and 15,000 men, 3 strength points came in here and were obviously defeated by an intrinsic 0 strength point unit, but with a +2 bonus from the fort. And so yes, they rolled a 6 and ended up with an 8 and caused a casualty, and the Union side caused a casualty. I think they rolled a 4 and they didn't have a bonus, so they caused a casualty on the 3 table, and that meant they lost overall, and they didn't cause a casualty because there wasn't a casualty to cause, which is quite interesting, because had this unit been in here, the Confederates would still have won the battle, but they'd have lost that strength point. So it kind of gives them the coastal, not manning the coastal forts gives them a kind of free shot at causing a casualty with nothing really on the line to lose. So that's, yeah, it's quite interesting how you work the sort of defence of your ports, which have obviously, a lot of which have got build points associated with them, like Mobile is worth 2, and the coastal forts, which are obviously, got some defences in them, but almost give you a free die roll to withstand the attack. So yeah. We're now in action phase 2, and it's a Union initiative, but with a dice difference of only 1, so there's just 1 action point in each theatre. I think the Union have just retaken Springfield. Curtis's army out here is still demoralised, but he just decided to seize Springfield while he had the opportunity. He'll rally his troops later. In the west here, these troops moved out of Charleston up onto a rail line, so hoping to get some rail movement at some point to get them somewhere useful. And Burnside rallied, I think, and now we're on to the Confederate side. So it's the end of turn 4, or 1861 here in the US Civil War. In the east, the Army of Northern Virginia moved to occupy Fredericksburg, and McClellan with the Army of the Potomac was sat outside Fredericksburg, successfully intercepted, hoping to hold it. The battle went horribly wrong for the Union. They took multiple casualties. I think I took the Army of the Potomac off because it was no use. McClellan has got 2 demoralised strength points left. And so that whole escapade across into Virginia cost 5 strength points maybe in being out of supply, and then 2 for Burnside, 1 for McClellan, 3 more for McClellan, 6 or 7 in battle. So they probably lost 11 strength points by dividing up their army into 2 and getting and then the initiatives went against them and they got picked off, demoralised, routed, pushed back, kept out of supply and forced back. And in this sort of state of disorganisation, the Army of Northern Virginia has been able to build it's got a fort under construction in Fredericksburg to try and hold this position and stop that supply getting down into this area north of Richmond. But Stoneman has managed to nip down and will capture Staunton, even though he's only got 1 strength point, because you can control can change at the end of the turn, so he's just nipped in and managed that. In the west, in Kentucky, the Confederates have just stepped across the Kentucky border and seized Columbus and Bowling Green. I figure that will be very short term. The Union did consider coming across the river with an army, but Buell is here, who's a bit crap, and he's got Grant with him, who's very clearly not. And we do want to give Buell an army, but we want to give Grant an army as well and have them operate maybe independently, because Grant can move so much quicker, and we might want to send Grant one way to recapture Bowling Green while Buell plods the other way down towards Johnston, and then have them join up with an attack on Nashville or something like that. But that's the situation here. The Confederates will enjoy momentarily the benefits of holding a couple of Kentucky sites. Over in the Trans-Mississippi, not much going on. Forts have been built, actually. I don't quite know why. I think just because I had Trans-Mississippi cards and I wanted them out of my hand, so we just built forts in certain places. Up there and in Little Rock, where Van Dorn is happily sitting out the war with nothing to do. And down in does whether this count? I know this is probably still the West, but New Orleans came under attack from Pope. He had a go at seizing New Orleans from Kirby Smith, and had a good go at it. Actually, caused a casualty, took a casualty, and is now sat outside with his army demoralised. And that will unfortunately give the Confederacy sufficient time to finish their fort in New Orleans and probably reinforce it, because we're going to get a reinforcement phase now. So yes, that adventure may come to nothing for the Union as well, and they haven't. Well, I suppose they've seized Richmond in 1862, lost it again, but still they have done some damage to the Confederate economy. And this, with Grant arriving, they've now got a leader on the board worthy of the name. If they can just dump Buell off somewhere, then he can operate independently with some strength points and get some stuff done. So I'm looking forward now to going into spring 62. Let's just have a look ahead. We're going to get some reinforcements, we're going to get some strategic movement, and then we're going to get some leaders arrive. Who's going to come in for the Union? Spring 62, Sigel, Thomas, Rosecrans and Sumner. That's a naval leader, so we won't worry about that. Johnston is going to be replaced with Lee in the east, and Hindman is going to come in the Trans-Mississippi. He's going to struggle to find something to command in the Trans-Mississippi. There's about 4 men and a grasshopper over there holding that. But anyway, that's where we are at the end of 1862.